Hello, everyone, and I would like to welcome you to this edition of the Two World Podcast. My name is Ken, and I'm glad to be with you this morning, and I'm even gladder for our two co-hosts, and I'd like to introduce them to you on this April morning, if you're Jacob, and April evening, if you are Barney. First, our co-host from Ohio.
Welcome, everyone. We're glad you're here. I am Jacob.
All right. And from the country of Japan, our second co-host.
And I am Barney.
And Barney's going to kind of lead us into an ambivalent topic. We're going to talk about celebrations of life, celebrations of the end of life, where there can be sadness, there can be joy. And we're going to talk a lot about personal experiences that we've encountered as we've gone through this life and encountered various ways to acknowledge the life of the person as well as the end of the life of that person. So, Barney, if you can take us in, thank you.
Yeah, I think just as Ken and Jacob and I have shared about the things going on in our lives, of recently, we realized that there's a little bit of a connection on events that we've shared in people passing that we knew. And in my situation, my wife's mother's mother, so her grandmother on her mom's side, passed away at the end of January. And then not long after that, her dad's mom also passed away. And I was not able to attend the service for her mom's mom, but I did have the chance to attend the service for her dad's mom. And I especially wanted to because she lived in the same house as Ayako's family for 40 years or more. Her husband passed away in his early 60s. He was in Siberia during World War II, and they found out that they actually, when he passed away, they actually asked if they could do some tests, an autopsy, I guess, which is fairly uncommon or people feel pretty uncomfortable with. But since he had served, they wanted to do so, and then they found out that he had suffered, had some declining health issues because of that time. But so her dad's mom was really close with the whole family that she was around that time, and then close with me because I would always give her special attention when I was there, and we would watch sumo together and hang out together. And so I was glad that I had the chance to ask for time off for that day. So in Japan, it's very important. So they do have special, I guess it would be bereavement days. So they don't count anything against your personal days that you can take that time off. But that I had been to one service before and was pretty unfamiliar with what was happening and wasn't coached in any way as to what to expect or what to do or how to participate. And then so I felt like I probably didn't do everything correct, especially when I think about the coaching that they did for us before the service for her dad's mom. And yeah, I don't know. It's very different. I've said quite a bit so far. Do you want to anything that you maybe I should clarify or any questions that came to mind while I was talking? Or
I think maybe just to share with our audience that today we're really wanting to reflect on celebrations of life and funerals and how we mark those transitions and passages for loved ones and how we remember them and honor them. And so I think your intro is perfect. You're helping us actually have something very unique that many of us will never have, is the insight into that cultural practice in another country. So yeah, please continue, Barney. Unless if Ken, if you have any questions that you want to add.
No questions. Barney, I'm interested as we go along. I know you have some slides to share as to how you felt going through it then, as far as the quote rightness or the correctness of encountering this and reacting to it, and what might have surprised you as you went through the experience.
Yeah. Thank you both of you for picking up on the fact that I was actually supposed to have been doing the introduction. Yeah, but yeah, the first time I just did the best I could to watch what everyone else was doing because I didn't realize that there is kind of an interactive part where people give incense in a way, and then there's a special kind of order to the gestures that you should do, and I did not pick them up, and I think that probably it's a case for sure where other people noticed, but other people were probably very graceful toward, generous toward me and not, expecting me to have known that, right? But so then it was interesting to see that y- before the service for my wife's grandmother, like even though everyone else there was probably relatively familiar with how the service goes, they were careful to explain how to do everything, even
Right.
how and in what kind of manner to bow, how to do the incense, and then what to do afterward. It was very thorough. That was good to kind of have everyone understand, make sure that they were on the same page for the service at that time.
Mm.
That's really interesting, and I feel like there's it's always humbling to think about, like, your experience as you share navigating lots of dimensions of living in another culture, and that it seems like the stakes can be so high with a memorial service or a funeral service, and so you really want of all the times, you really wanna get that right, but it's encouraging to hear too that there is, like, a lot of understanding from family and friends for like, you as a visitor and now a permanent resident, like, integrated in, but, like, for people who are coming to the traditions, not having grown up with them their whole life, it seems like there's grace, which is nice, and it seems like the fact that you try, like, I know you've told me before when we visited Yachio Bible Baptist Church, like, if you try to speak in Japanese and it's not perfect, people just appreciate that you're
Hmm.
trying, so
Hmm.
there is
Hmm.
that element, that is encouraging there.
Mhm.
Yeah. Hmm. Yeah. Maybe I could just kind of give an overview of kind of how things were. So after the person passes away, the body is kept on dry ice, actually. There isn't really any embalming. And at the home, and people come by and offer incense in that way. And then there are people who come and they do makeup and they kind of, they put on a special kimono and there's a service involved there for like tying the ribbons on kind of like ceremonial shoes. They're not really shoes. They're not really socks, but they're also not really tabby shoes, which are shoes that have one hole for the toe or for the big toe and then another section for the rest of the toes. And there's symbolism behind all of this, getting the person prepared for their journey, through the next few days. And then they also include some of their either favorite things or some of the things that are noted for them. But then there are things that have to be burnable because eventually the body will be cremated, but not maybe not in the sense that probably some of our listeners are thinking, not very cremated at all, to be honest. So a majority of the bones are left behind, and then that happens after the service. So actually, maybe now we're kind of fast forwarding about 5 days after the person passes away, and then if you can show me the first If you can display the first slide, Jacob, the first photo. So here in the middle is my wife's dad. He had one sister, so he's kind of now in charge of the family. So he was kind of the MC. And you can see many bouquets of flowers from the families. And there's little plaques with those flowers. And those are the names of the people who gave the bouquets. And then Yuma is kind of hiding a little set. Like people also kind of give like useful items for the family. Like it could be like soy sauce or oil or things like that. That like kind of the way that people would make meals for someone when they're grieving. So this is kind of a way to just think about the family and help them out. And then there is a big arrangement of flowers in the middle, and then below that is a white kind of casket, but it's not made out of wood. And then that has the grandmothers inside that. And then above that is a little bit of a shrine and a photo of her. And then on the table that's covered with kind of the white or gray cloth, you can kind of see three kind of black boxes.
Mhm.
And in those boxes are coals, and next to them are little pinches of incense. So we kind of maybe when you hear incense, maybe you kind of think of like the sticks of incense, but these are kind of like those like really chopped up, but it's kind of a mixture of different types of incense. And then the person explained to us, you take a pinch when it's your turn, and then after you've bowed to everyone, you take a pinch, and at first you hold it up near your forehead, and then you drop it in, and then you take another pinch, and then that one you just drop straight into the coals. And then you do, in my case, I did a little honest prayer from my heart, but I think otherwise, like just a gesture is enough, and then bowing and then sitting back down. And after that, then the monk would come and he recited Sanskrit for about an hour on end. And it's kind of to kind of bring a little bit of sense of peace and kind of a little bit of sense of togetherness, even though, more, it's not necessarily like remembering the person. It's more of helping the soul, the spirit to get ready to move on to the next stage in their life. And then after that ceremony, we one thing that was really interesting is they have lots and lots and lots of flowers, kind of the same flowers that are in the bouquet, but most of them are cut off of the stem, and everyone sticks the flowers inside of the casket, and just heaps and heaps and heaps of flowers, so that almost you cannot see the body anymore, but kind of being referential toward the face. So the face is still exposed, but otherwise it's filled and filled and filled with flowers. And then we took the body to kind of the crematory, which is in the same building. And then we ate lunch while that was being prepared. And and then after that, kind of the last thing that we did was you I wasn't sure if I was ready for this because my wife told me her experience from her mom's mom passing away, but you go in and you get chopsticks, long-handled chopsticks, and you and another person kind of like going it together, supporting each other, kind of that kind of symbolism, pick up bones and put them into the urn. And I guess they start with the feet first, kind of like the image of the person is standing on a firm foundation. And then, like, the last one that they would put in would be from the throat, because I guess some people say that, like, that shape of it looks like a seated Buddha. And also, it's, the person's voice and, their way to kind of during their lifetime that they would have, prayed and things like that. So it's extra special. And also like the spine, or also if there's any skull left, that would be associated with memories and whatnot. In Ayako's mom's case, like she had had hip surgery. So my wife was saying how stark it was to see the bolts there on the table left over. So bones, and then, the medical device that had supported her were just there, as it were. And then on the next slide, you can see we're all gathered there together. And some family members came from real far away. And my father-in-law, my wife's dad, is holding the green box, and it has the ribbon on it, which inside the box is the urn. And then outside the urn is tied with a white cloth in a way of like showing that like there's completion to the ceremony, but also like security. And then from there, the box goes to the house and stays there again at like a little altar that's set up for 49 days. So 7 weeks, or, 7 periods of 7 days, where kind of the spirit of the person, as the priest kind of explained it to us, he said, he opened the door to heaven for her, and then it's our job to get her into heaven through incense and whatnot, and being attentive over the next 49 days, where it's thought that like her spirit is kind of getting rid of the attachments that were left behind. And one other thing that I'll mention here is when people pass away, they get a new name. And it's kind of like just to like show that they're different, that like to get rid of their attachments to earth again. Like, I guess long ago it was thought that like if you said the deceased's name too strongly, they might get kind of pulled back, and it would be hard for them to make their final journey, onward into heaven. And so with a new name, then they're a kind of new, fresh person. And I think that my wife is in the middle. Yeah, next to her dad. She's holding like a wood plaque there. And then that's the new name. And then next to her is her aunt. So her dad's sister, holding the picture of their mom.
Mm.
And then after 49 days, then before we go further, then that's when we make the final stop at the temple. So I'll just pause right there because maybe you still have some questions, because it's pretty new.
Oh, boy.
It's interesting to me, the symbolism with numbers, 7 sets of 7. I mean, 7 is an
Mhm.
interesting number in the Jewish tradition and Christian tradition, and it's fascinating to me that that number would be used in that way. Like,
Yeah.
I'm thinking
Yeah.
of the year of Jubilees, there are these 7
Right.
sets of 7, and then the 50th year is this special year. So, I don't know, it's just that there
Mm.
it's fascinating to look sometimes at ways of mark demarcating transition or passage in different cultures, and sometimes there's surprisingly overlap, and it could be
Yeah.
coincidental. It's just fascinating.
Mhm. Mhm.
Barney, are there obituaries?
I don't think that there are. Now that you mention it, I
Okay.
think you do see mention of people passing in like the city kind of newsletter, but it doesn't mention names. It just says, this month, this many people passed away, and that this many people were born, kind of like that. But yeah, I don't think there are obituaries.
Hmm, interesting.
But yeah, but somehow it's interesting that people people understand. I Now that there is one thing instead of obituaries. So there is a tradition, instead of having Christmas cards, we send out New Year's cards. But if someone passes away in your family, you're not supposed to send out New Year's cards because you don't have something happy to share. So in lieu of that, you actually send out like notice of, the kind of bereavement cards to everyone, so that they don't send you a New Year card, because they're supposed, in a way of being respectful for the year, the rough times that you've had. And
Okay.
I think that way that really spreads helps people to understand what has happened, and kind of maybe that's kind of the what might be equivalent of an obituary in that way, right? And then, so if you can go to the next picture, I'll show that. So then, after a small ceremony at the temple, then this is the other place was kind of like was yeah like a funeral home, and then this is far off in Tokyo because this is where the family grave ended up being because I wife's grandma did grow up in Tokyo, but after the bombings, the fire bombings in World War II, they escaped to Narita. But the family grave is still in Tokyo. And this person, you can see, he is just replacing the the small altar that is kind of behind the two silver cups there. And when you when you loosen it and move it to the side, there's a hole, and inside the hole are urns from the other people who have passed away already. And depending on he actually kind of cautioned us that from now on, since the grave is getting full, we should try to collect just the most important bones and keep it in smaller urns so that there's space for more people who might want to be put in that grave as well. And you can kind of see two kind of big black or big wooden plaques behind the grave. And those are the new name of the grandmother and when she passed away. And so we're gathered around the grave, and then that person kind of back pulled away a bit. And then you can see, and maybe we can go to the next slide, that, we plant flowers and we also put water on the grave just as a sense of a symbolism of like giving the person sustenance and that all the other people in the grave. Ayako's mom was really adamant, about, you can't put too much on there, to make the people feel more comfortable. And this is something then that will happen especially on the spring and fall equinoxes are the two really important days to tend to graves. And they're actually days off for us so that families can have the chance to attend to their graves. And I think maybe we have one more photo that's a little bit more zoomed out, and then you can see them, being really attentive toward the care of the grave and kind of the other graves that are around there. And yeah, at the 49th day, then the conclusion of all this, then there's really, really, really the sense that the spirit of the person has made it safely into heaven and that they're at rest and at peace and kind of free of their connections that might be holding them back. And that kind of like the new generation is leading on now. And but then just the care toward the grave for respectfulness, kind of family unity, and then I guess we kind of actually look forward to this August when it's thought that the spirits come home just for a week, about 5 days of visiting. And then there's certain ceremonies that take place then just at the home, not at the temple. And then I guess since will be the first time for the people that have passed away for visiting back to their homes, there will be extra ceremonies that will, or extra uh, rituals, I guess, that the family will do this time to kind of welcome them back. So it'll be really interesting to see that for me, from my perspective, to see how the family responds to it, because it's kind of the first time that thinking that the wife and her husband are finally back together again and then visiting, the grandmother and then, her husband, they were separated for so many, almost 40 years. Then they'll be back together visiting the family again in August. So it'll be kind of neat to see how everyone feels at that time.
Is it commonplace to visit the site certain
I
times or in
mm,
general?
Yeah, I know that the grandmother actually was always caring for it,
Okay.
as she could. But yeah, it's especially the spring and fall equinoxes,
Mhm.
and but beyond that, it'll be interesting. I think the the dad's sister, who is kind of in the middle there with the light brown hair, she will probably she lives closer, so she'll probably be caring for it, probably with a little bit more dedication, I would think, for this over this year, I would think so.
Barney, I remember you mentioning before that just to make another connection more broadly, culturally in Japan, the Yachio Bible Baptist Church would have a day when they as a community would go to the cemetery and kind of maintain the graves of their loved ones there at the cemetery, which I know is a slightly different context because, there would have the Christian practices, but
Right.
but yet they still have that, I feel, sensitivity corporately to go and tend graves together, which is unique and distinct from here in the
Mhm,
US where
mhm,
we might corporately go to a graveside for a committal or the actual ceremony, but then after that happens, you
mm,
don't tend to think of a church community going, not as commonly anyway, I should say,
right,
but yeah.
right. Yeah, and it's neat, of course, that Yetsu Bible Baptist, we do it on Easter when we go. Mhm,
Oh, wow.
mhm,
Oh, that's an interesting connection. We were just this
mhm,
when we celebrated Easter this past year at Worcester Mennonite, I referenced a hymn that's really prominent in the Orthodox Christian tradition. It says, "By death he trampled death." It's talking about Jesus, and it says, "And to those in the tomb he granted life." And I think it's
mhm,
interesting thinking about those in the tombs,
mhm,
and that connection when they visit the cemetery is really interesting and
mm,
rich.
Mm. Wow.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that.
Yes.
mhm.
Thank you, Barney. Yeah.
Is there anything that you would like to share by way of like, now that you've been living in Japan, and then when you come back to the US and you think about experiences here, has it shaped somehow grieving, or would you do anything differently personally after having encountered the kind of way that that your family in Japan and that have marked these times of mourning or transitions? Has it kind of added anything new to what you already would have done?
It is interesting to see that it is a bit structured. I mean, of course, each person deals with their grief personally, but there is, with having so many ceremonies involved, it feels like maybe there's more of a way of doing it together. I remember the first time that I went to a funeral, it was for the mother of someone at my work, and I noticed that, I never met her and my coworkers never met her. So we were there to support the person whose mother passed away, but even so, a number of people were crying. And I, not knowing anything, I was surprised at that because I thought they don't know this person. And still, they're feeling this really strong emotion behind it. And in a way, it's still a little bit mysterious, I guess, for me. But now that I've studied it a bit and experienced it, then I can kind of understand that a bit better. But coming from the tradition and what I'm used to from being in America, where, I've experienced more funerals, then it's kind of easier to make that connection. But I'm still very curious and eventually went to talk with my family about how they felt emotionally during that time, but maybe after just a little bit more, I think.
Hmm.
Thank you for sharing that, Barney.
Mhm,
Yeah.
mhm,
Well, maybe we can kind of segue into an experience I had, and it's very recent, and as in
mm,
yesterday. I will basically take you through it, kind of citing the facts and the way it felt a little bit. The background would be a former boss of my wife at a research and develop agricultural research and development center in Worcester, Ohio, through the Ohio State University, passed away about a week ago. Her name is Sally, and she was renowned in the field of plant pathology to the extent that she was known around the world. She served a term as the national United States president of the Phytopathological Society, which is a very prestigious position. And then she was struck by a disease which eventually became diagnosed as Lyme disease, and it stole her ability to walk. It stole almost her ability to speak, and she passed away about a week ago. And as we visited the family and became aware of the process which was going to occur, w- my wife Angie and I learned a lot about it. And if we could go to the first slide, Jacob, please. The family, there are three children, two women and a young man. They decided, based upon knowing their mother quite well, to have a green process. And they secured a spot, as you see people walking up to a spot. They were able to pick a spot at a place called the Wilderness Center, which is a little bit east of Worcester, in a field that they can at one point conduct, and still probably do, conduct a controlled burn so that the grass is not high, and you can literally pick a spot in the ground to lay your loved one. The hole is dug for the purpose of burying the person there. Now, the pathway you're seeing as it led up to where people had gathered also was the pathway where the casket was carried up to the burial plot. The casket was simply made of pine. It was a pine box. Sally is inside. She is dressed in silk, which also will disappear into the earth as time goes on, as well as the casket as well. The graves are marked simply with a flat stone that's engraved, and this is a place called Fox Field, which is just a designated area of the Wilderness Center for people who choose to conduct a burial in this way. And the basic process, once we gathered, I think the next slide would be appropriate, Jacob. I wanted to take I do wanna say first, I wanted to take a lot of pictures, but as I looked around, no one was doing that. So I felt like I needed to kind of honor what was happening. So just basically to take you through it quickly, there was a steward designated. His name is Jonathan. He's a faculty member from the main campus of Ohio State University in Columbus. He talked a bit about her accomplishments. He talked a bit about his relationship with her because he's a relatively new faculty member, and talked very tenderly about the human aspects of Sally. And once he finished doing that, the microphone was passed to Sally's oldest daughter, Allison, who is a resident of California. And Allison, to her credit, read a letter she had written to her mom very recently and was unable to get it to her. And, she's living with some regret in that regard because she felt like she could have. but the tribute was very tender, it was very moving, and it was all about a mom and a daughter at that point, and it really added to the ambiance of the day. At that point, we moved into the ritual of letters and flowers, and everyone was given that desired was given a small clipboard with a biodegradable piece of paper on it, and we were instructed to talk to Sally, to tell Sally something, and there was no real design to it, and so we did that, and then you take the piece of paper, and there were 2 containers of flowers near the casket, which was set up on boards at that point, and you could then set your message to Sally along with a flower on top of the casket, and, obviously, many people chose to do that. It was a it was a time sort of silence, although there was music in the background, and one very moving moment, her husband, Chip, they were high school sweethearts, so they had been together 54 years, they were married for 49. Chip very much was feeling the sadness at that point, and he obviously knew the song very well, and he began to sing and kind of wail while the song was going, which didn't seem unnatural for the moment at all. It was really a man exhibiting his total and complete love for a partner who has now left this life on earth. Once that was done, the pallbearers came up, and there were straps around the bottom of the pine box, and they lifted the casket up just a bit so the boards could be pulled out, and then the casket was laid into its final resting place in the earth. And at that point, with no real order involved, anyone was welcome to come up and grab grab a shovel, and we were all welcome to throw dirt into the hole until the casket was completely covered and the dirt rose to the top of the grave site. And at that point, people were welcome to linger, to talk to one another, to meditate in silence. And I guess, guys, in the midst of all of this, as a, lifelong Christian, what really struck me was that there was absolutely no spiritual aspect to this at all, as far as a God, our God, whatever God, their God. There was no mention made, but yet there was a very holy feeling throughout the entirety of this particular service. It took a while, and because of the nature of the vehicles pulled in, and Jacob, if you wanna go ahead and advance, I forgot to yeah. No one's going to leave quickly because it was a very small road, and that felt fine as well. We did then gather on the campus of the Ohio State's OERDC in Worcester at an indoor facility where there was food and where, there was laughter, where there were tears. Just a couple of people spoke, but that started to feel like the time to reflect on Sally's life and share happy stories, especially, and talk to the family a bit, to their daughter Allison, who had spoke, and their daughter Carly and their son Mike. And for me personally, having been employed there for about 5 years, I was really honored by people coming up to me that I got to work with and be part of, including the faculty in Columbus. I was touched by the fact that we got to reconnect with some of them just for that moment and talk and reflect on Sally's life. Guys, she was incredible. My connection to her as as the grants administrator was to just remind her about spending her monies and that the way it needed to be done, and she was always kind and patient when I walked in because, I'm in a sense kinda like the accountant who has to call
Mm.
people to make sure things are paid on time and, probably not always happy to see me. But she was as gracious then as she was in the ending times of her disease. Fortunately, she has 2 wonderful grandchildren who were the light in her life. She she progressed into things she could do. She was still writing. She had, I think, 156 journal entries in her career, and she continued writing afterwards to help some of the young faculty members, some of the staff who were deeply involved in plant pathology. She really started to become adept at crocheting items
Mm.
for her loved ones, and a lot of those appeared at the reception on campus later, along with, pictures of her and so on. So, a very different thing for me. I've been to a lot of traditional funeral home
Mm.
gatherings, some other celebrations of life that were a bit different than traditional, calling hours and a church service to follow, and I talked to more than one person who said, "I really was convinced I would be cremated, but this, having experienced it,
Mm.
gave me food for thought about
Mm.
just another way I might have, the conclusion of my
Mm.
life dealt with." I think that's all I have to say. Thanks.
Was was the ceremony was it something that the family planned, or was that kind of how each ceremony would go at the Wilderness Center?
It's a good question, Barney. It was totally planned by the family,
Mm, mhm,
and they asked Jonathan to be the steward. One little part I didn't mention is Sally's older sister. Sally came from a big family. I think there were 6 kids, and her older sister spoke as well, and
mm,
it was the closest thing to spirituality that I felt during the service. She had a dream right be before right after Sally's passing where she saw Sally spreading her arms and standing and walking, which she was unable to do at the end, and it was very vivid to her, and she felt at that point that, Sally had reached total and complete
mm,
freedom
mm, mm.
and released from the travails she faced in this life.
It is interesting to think about how already we've talked about, like, thinking about a funeral or celebration of life in the Japanese context with practices from would that be Buddhism? Is that
Yeah,
right,
that's right.
Barney?
Mhm,
And
mhm,
then we've thought a little bit about non like a less religious ceremony, but still very grounded in nature and sharing. And there are some common threads about how humans in general just honor those who have gone on and how
mhm,
they want to remember
mhm,
them and think of them. And the idea of wanting the person who's gone on to be free or at home or, these kind of universal themes. I think that's really interesting. The idea of for in Buddhism, they talked of heaven, but like you just said, Barney, in this case, Sally's sister talking about this dream about her being free and it's a really interesting connections.
Mhm.
So
And Jacob, you used the word universal, and I think more than once I thought about having visited a Universalist church. I got that feeling particularly with even though it wasn't mentioned, finding God in nature aspect.
mhm.
yeah, that's a really interesting observation. And so maybe it's maybe helpful for those who are learning about this topic and wondering like, well, what does it look like to honor somebody's life and
Mhm.
when you're in different contexts and like even a non-religious service can have like moments of transcendence or spiritual like you said it almost feels like spirituality a sense of like consideration and wonder and awe or like being out in nature the appreciation of that beauty and how it relates to the journey of the loved one anyway I just thought
Mhm.
that's fascinating.
Mhm. Mhm.
Well, would it be alright if I shared a little bit,
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
now? Okay, perfect. Well, what I'd like to share is about my family story and how where I am now gives me a kind of interesting lens to think about some of the past of my family's history. And what I mean to say by that is now I'm serving as a pastor in the Mennonite tradition, which is a peace tradition, a peace church
Mm,
tradition. And but my family, my on my mother's side, my grandfather served in the military, and this is me standing with him at
mm,
Arlington National Cemetery by his gravestone. My At that point, this was in 2006. My grandmother had already gone on, and
mm,
as it would turn out, my grandfather would go on not much longer after this
mm,
picture was taken. But I was able to go with him and remember my grandmother. I was at her funeral years ago, and I think it was 1997, so it was about 9 years before this for her funeral. But then to come back with him was very meaningful. And the thing that struck me about being there, and I'll go to another slide here, and this is a picture I took recently when I went with Katie and our children to visit the grave site again, is just the scope and the scale of all of the gravestones in Arlington. It's
mm,
almost overwhelming. It's very meditative and quiet when you go in, and there is a stillness about the place, and it's does definitely feels like there is a weightiness and a quietude or that honors like that is a resting place of so many people. But just looking at the and this is just one little section, but just seeing all the gravestones, it's humbling and overwhelming to think of all the lives that have
mm,
gone on before, and some of them lives that were extinguished during military combat
mm,
and warfare, and so being there was a really unique experience, and it kind of pulls on my heartstrings in different ways. Like I have these family connections, and I care so much about my relatives, and then it pulls on my heartstrings as an Anabaptist and wanting to advocate for peace and a different
mm,
approach to resolving conflicts. But my one of my uncles also served in the military and was given a special ceremony at his funeral, and I there were not many of us who were able to go, but I went to support my mom's
mm,
family. There were just 3 of us there, and during this ceremony, they do some unique things. They have a chaplain who gives a eulogy, but
mm,
then you see in the center of the photo, there's a box there that holds the remains of my uncle, and they fold
mm,
a flag, and first they hold a flag over top of that, and then they fold it, and as part of the ceremony, which is connected with honoring the service of the person who has passed away. And then you can see further in the background of the picture a number of people
mm,
standing there, real small,
mhm,
but they
mhm,
actually do a gun salute. And so they fire their weapons, and then there is somebody who plays taps, that,
mhm.
kind of
Oh,
military song that's played at the end of the day, which, in this context becomes kind of a
mm,
closing of a life, the end of the day and the cycle of military life, but in this case, marking his final, yeah, recognition.
mm,
And, it was a very interesting experience. I was honored to be able to go with my family and to support them and to listen to the words that were shared. I think the chaplain, not knowing my uncle, tried to honor him, but just to kind of see a different way that people would would seek to mark a transition and have respect and
mm,
yeah, honor or think of the person. So yeah, that was a very distinct memory. And so I just wanted to share that as because we're talking about different experiences we've had,
yeah,
and this one is very unique for me. And it's not like
yeah.
pretty much anything else that I've had experience with serving as a pastor or just in my personal life. So are there any questions about this at this point, or should I keep going?
I really appreciate what you're saying about the vastness of it. I've been to Arlington many, many, many times. because I was a teacher and we would take 8th graders there, and
Ah,
eh, yeah, you look around and say, "My goodness," all the ground that's taken up and yet to come, and we would couple it with the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier ceremony as well. I wanted to say also, Jacob, in watching the soldiers with the folding of the cross, I'm sure, and I'm sort of basing this upon the fact that our son-in-law, Tim, is in the Air Force, and his job for a couple of years was to stand by caskets at funeral home for those that have served. I'm sure those people right there considered it a huge honor
mm, mm,
for your uncle to be
mm,
part of it, and I'm sure they treated it as such as
Oh,
well.
yes. I feel like, yeah, there's something that's probably very hard to understand if you're not in the military or haven't served. It's just the way that don't even know what language to use for it. The way of presence, of recognition when
mhm,
someone's standing at attention and when they salute and, how that would feel for somebody who's been a part of that culture, served in that way. It
Yep.
probably has such a significance that many of us probably don't quite fully understand. We can observe it and say, "Oh, that's a sign of respect what they're doing," but it probably
mm,
resonates
mm,
very differently for somebody who's had that
Yes.
experience. So, yeah, I could sense at every point throughout the service that there were intentional actions, kind of like Barney had said about the service that he was recounting. There were very intentional moments
yes.
in the transition and the movement forward of the parts of the service that are meant to honor the person and give show signs of respect. And so, yes, I agree. That's a good point, Ken. Yes. So now, just kind of following through with this thread of the kind of family history. uh, I was able to go with my mom years ago and Micah and Aubrey and Katie to New Lexington, where a lot of my relatives are buried. My grandparents on my dad's side are buried there. I have a great aunt who's buried there, and then my mom and dad are buried there now. And so I just thought this was an interesting picture. Like Barney was saying earlier, it's part of kind of the natural culture in Japan and to some extent here in the US to revisit a cemetery and honor our loved ones by tending the graves. And maybe it's less of an emphasis here, but it still happens. And so this is a case where we were going and visiting the graves near where my grandparents were buried. And I had an aunt that I never met who passed as a young child. And
Mm,
this is her grave, I believe, that they're looking at now and just kind of tending that. And so, I really appreciate this picture that it shows my mom kind of showing Micah a way to pour the water into the flowers and to think about that. It's kind of an
mm,
intergenerational practice that
mhm,
a value that's passed on. And then my mom really wanted to have a gravestone that the grandkids could come and sit on. She specifically
mm,
ordered one that was a bench, and she said, "I'd love when they would come that they could sit on it or play on it." And so this is a picture of Mike and Aubrey when we came to visit that gravestone and them doing exactly what she wanted and
mm,
hoped for. And so it was nice because it's something that she set up and for them, but also it honored her in letting them enjoy the stone in that way. And then here's a
mm,
close up of
mm,
the gravestone, and I really love that she selected her wedding photo with my dad for the gravestone. It was just a really nice picture of them looking at each other, and it really, I think, encapsulates the spirit of their relationship, this kind of mutual regard and mutual love and care, and so I'm really
mm.
grateful that that's on the gravestone. And
Yeah.
then oh, I'm sorry, was there
No, it's just
okay.
really great.
Oh,
Mhm.
thank you. And then the final maybe chapter of the family story that I'd like to share is in 2024, towards the end of the year, we had the celebration of life for my father-in-law, Ed, and it was such a meaningful time. And this is a picture of the photo board that was at his celebration of life service, and there were two of them. But I just loved what was selected for the photo board, pictures from his youth, pictures from his adult life, and I just was really struck by what people shared during the time of sharing in the service, and he had had a long decline later in life, struggling with cognitive impairment and dementia, and felt like we were slowly losing him over time. But this service was a chance to kind of come back together with family and be reminded of who he was, and
Mhm.
particularly the vitality in his younger years and the dynamism of his personality. And so, yeah, I think a memorial service can be healing and help people come together. And I have another picture here of Micah, Aubrey, Hannah, and Katie at the grave site there in Defiance, where my father-in-law Ed is buried, and my mother-in-law Pamela. And this is another case where they're reading the stone and tending
Mhm.
to the grave, and Hannah's there looking at something, asking questions. And I just
Mm.
think there is something really healthy with a family that's willing to talk about this part of our stories and to go and to remember the person, and even though there's been loss, to name that and to
Mhm.
grieve together. And then after so long, when you go back, it feels different. I mean, I'm not saying that it ever fully goes away, but there's this kind of at least in my own experiences, a type of a peace that emerges. And then, at least in my experience, when you remember and you're there, there's can also be a joy for the good of the time with the person in their life. So I'm not saying that everybody has to experience it that way, but I'm just saying
Right.
that that
Mm.
can be what happens over time as you go back. It that practice of returning can be healing and actually very helpful at arriving at a sense of groundedness in oneself or peace. So, so this is like my personal story, kind of the importance of intergenerational support and coming together, and how it takes different shapes and forms, but has been really meaningful to share with you today and to talk about it. How having family surrounding me in these times were so important.
Mhm.
But now I was hoping to transition just quickly and to think about, as a pastor, some of the experiences that I've had and how meaningful it's been to walk with others who are grieving, and to try to support them in their journey. And one of the most memorable ones that I can think of actually is with your mom, Barney, because when we were getting ready for her celebration of life service, I was able to go back through and watch. Our church records worship services, and she had done a number of calls to worship for our services, and I went back and to watch those and hear her voice and what she said, and
Mm.
then to think about that in light of the moment when we were going to honor her. It was just so powerful. And another thing that happened is, as I was getting ready to, I don't know if it was you, Barney, or one of your family members, but you found these notes in her
Mhm.
Bible that she had taken, and the art, the coloring that she did with this message. And we were able to scan these and include them in the bulletin for the service. And it was so
Mhm.
nice to give to everybody who came that day, but also to see the scriptures that she was reading. You know, we see here Psalm 24:1, the Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is my strength and my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? And then we have Psalm 79:9, hear us, O God, our Savior, for the glory of your name. Deliver us and forgive our sins for your name's sake. And John 3:16, like these scriptures that she was thinking about are about life and
Mhm.
rescue and salvation. And they spoke very powerfully to this time when we were together. And after a little bit after the celebration of her life, we had a time in church where we were able to take a prayer shawl that Liz had knitted and had given to the church for a while, and we were able to say, we'd like to present this back to Ron and to the family, just as something to remember Liz by and appreciate that we had had a season of enjoying it, but now to give it back to the family so that they could have that for years to come, and maybe even use it from time to time. If Ron
Mhm.
ever wanted, he could wrap himself in that prayer shawl as he prayed or as he thought of Liz. And so we were able to put it on Ron and to pray for him and pray with you, Barney, and with your sister. And these types of moments as a pastor are incredibly meaningful and rich, and they stay with me. And I always remember them because there is a certain type of, like you said, Ken, a holiness, a sense of holiness in moments like this when people have come through grief and they're remembering their loved one. And I feel God draws near in very special ways to us in these times. And we can be present to each other in very special ways. So yeah, so I wanted to share that. Thank you so much for listening. Do
Mhm.
you have any responses or thoughts that you would like to share now as I've done that?
I just think that we could probably do a whole episode on just you talking about how it is to be a pastor in these situations, 'cause
Yeah.
it's such a unique position to be in, and especially when you've had the chance to be with a congregation for a while and get to know everyone so closely and in different ways, especially, members who are especially involved. As you said, my mom had done call to worship a number of times, and but then also be in such a unique position where a lot of us, especially the family members, look to you for support as we don't know what to do.
Mm.
We're we're adrift in a way, and you have so many roles that you have to fulfill at that time, and it just to one day being able to hear more and more and more of your experiences would be so, it must be so rich, I would think. And I remember that day being so surprised seeing how many people were there, and just the service was so great. I remember I joked to you at the end. I said, well, now I don't have to go to church anymore because you know nothing could have beaten that service, and it was just so wonderful. And I have to imagine that probably everyone feels the same way, that the services that you have done for people probably just have such a great meaning to them, and are such a help in the service and the time before and then the time after too. I know that being able to spend time with you throughout that time was such a big, big, big help for me too.
Well, well, thank you so much, Barney, for those kind words. And I think it is a great honor to be allowed to be present in these times. And I think when you consider that people are listening in a very unique way to what is said, and they're attentive to what is happening in a very focused way in a time like this. And so it's a great honor and a privilege. And I try to like remember that and seek to y- hold it with with care and love each time, because I realize, like, when I think about my own experience and people who ministered to me and my family when we were going through the grief, the things that they said and the opportunity to be together as a family and to have another person like that leading us in certain parts, it stays with me too. And so, yeah, thank you for saying that. And I do feel grateful. It's one of my favorite, cherished things as a pastor to be able to be a part of things like that. It's
Mm-hmm.
very meaningful. One final note that I'd want to say about these pictures that I've shared here at the end is that it's possible for me to show you this photo because Ken took it. I believe that
Ah,
Ken is the one who sent me this and the previous photo too. So Ken, thank you for being willing to capture
mm,
moments like this too. I know you said you captured the pictures out in the field earlier. Maybe many people weren't taking pictures at the time, but it's really nice to have these to look back on. And same with church. You often will catch a photo in a moment that's special and text it to me. So thank you so much for
mm,
that. Yeah.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Sure. Are there any final thoughts that either of you would like to share before we close our episode?
It's neat to see the richness and variety that we have experienced today, but also the unifying themes to to the ways that we as people around the world deal with the loss of people, and also recognize their the way that their lives have touched each of us and how we honor them. It's really neat to hear all of our stories and see the connections and see what's new.
Mhm. Yeah, I always feel very lucky that I've had the privilege of being exposed not only to different church services as such, but the cultural aspects as well. Barney, it was just fascinating to listen to the detail of how it properly is done and your trepidation about, treating it the way it needed to be treated. Yeah. And Jacob, it was wonderful to reminisce the day of the service honoring Barney's mother's memory. Yeah, as you said, these are moments you don't forget, and it
Mhm.
still feels real. And yeah, thanks, guys.
Thank you both so much. I really appreciate this time. And for our listeners, I had one final picture that I wanted to share with you as a parting reflection as we close this time. And this picture is actually of a cemetery near where I live, St. James Cemetery.
Mhm.
And when I was growing up, particularly in high school, I would run by this cemetery. As I was exercising, I would look over and sometimes I'd stop and just stand there for a moment. And it's on a hillside, beautiful plot of land in the country. During sunset, the way the light shines on the land, it's really pretty, and the sunlight then goes down into the valley. I've walked in the cemetery before on a winter's day, and the snow would blow, and it was so still and quiet. And I guess maybe I just want to close here with this reflection. Hopefully, as you've come along this journey with us, you've reflected on how it's important to take time to remember those who have gone on before us. And it's also important to think about our own journey and to come to a place of peace that as we move forward, that there is beauty, that there is love surrounding us, that as was referred to earlier, there's something special out in nature when we get out, and it's important for us to take time to pull away, to be quiet, and to appreciate that. And I guess my hope would be for all of us that when we think about our own life's journey, that even as we think about the end, coming to the end, that there can be some sense of hope and peace, that that end can have stillness and can have hope and it can have life in its own way. So thank you again for this time, and we look forward to next time. And then until then, goodbye.